Yeah, that's the big one maybe that people think of to this day is that dreaded knock on the door. Do you have a few moments to talk about our Lord and Savior?
But there's more than that, right? So there's a lot of missionaries that do go to third world countries and provide aid in the
Yeah.
name of God to convert, right? Like, so I think the first part of being a missionary is to share the word of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
The missionary place was non-denominational. So was
Mhm.
that like still like Christian, just non-denominational? Okay, so I was like, I was wondering if there were like non-Christian missionaries, and all of a sudden I was like, my mind was blown.
For
Um,
sure.
I think that's
but
just Habitat for Humanity.
I think that's just the UN.
yeah, Peace Corps, I guess there
I
are. Yeah, you're right. I would assume that like nuns are a form of missionaries, right? Like in monks, maybe, like because you're like on a lifelong mission. I don't know if
Married
that's
to
like,
God.
yeah, like I don't know if that's like if they're like
I
the
actually
higher, like,
don't know what a nun does now that I'm thinking of it. I'm like, they just cloister?
Growing up, we were always at each other's throats. Communication was really tough between us. And then when she was about 16, no, she was about 18, she was dating this guy whose mother was a traveling minister. And my sister got like radically saved, like
Ah.
born again. And the change in her countenance and the way that she interacted with me and the way that we could actually finally have a relationship that wasn't abusive, I was like, oh my gosh. So that was sort of the gateway into my faith experience. It was.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to We're Experts Now. I'm your host, Rebecca.
and I'm Jackie here for one more week. This is the last one. Just kidding. We would never do that to you, listeners.
Hanging on by a thread.
Yes.
Come on. Send us some love. Give us a 5-star review. You know you want to.
Like, subscribe, tell a friend. Actually, we did hit 300 subscribers on YouTube today, so that's
News to
pretty
me.
good.
Wow. Okay.
Thank you,
That happened
300.
today.
Yeah, like,
This
what is it,
is
the 300?
Sparta.
Yeah, this is Sparta. We love you, every 300 of you. Yeah, so here we are. How you been?
Oh, I am great. I just opened the window for a little more sunshine. Just loving spooky season. What's going on in your world?
Well, we're gonna go back in time. This is not a recent amateur alert, and this is just an awful story. But
And not the only occasion.
Right. This we're talking about your birthday last year, I think it was. I like had taken some time off dating. I was just being me, just being Jackie, hanging out. And I decided to get back into the dating pool. And one of the first guys I went out with, we're on the date. I was kind of like unsure, but he kind of mentions that he had been arrested before while we were on the date. And I was like, that's like, like we all have a past. We're in our 30s, right? Like, as long as this is something that like we've learned and changed from, like, that's like, fine. Thinking it's going to be like a DUI or a drug charge or something like silly that like, teenagers get into, right? Street racing. I don't know, something stupid. Well, backstory, I did do opposition research at one point in my career. That was like not a long stint that I have. It was a short one. It obviously wasn't for me. So like I can figure out information on people like if I want to. And so like I just kind of like logged that in my brain that he had said he had been arrested. So like after the date, it's the next morning, I'm flying down to LA for Rebecca's birthday in Palm Springs, and I just start doing some light Googling because my flight's delayed. And I figure out his last name. I like kind of narrow it down. And then I like Google this last name that is not common at all. And it just basically the thing that pops up is student with machete attacks too.
What a headline. And way
I
to
was
bury the
like,
lead.
so I had to text the guy and be like, hey, I found this article just like 1-to-1, like make sure this is actually you. And then like, two, can we talk about it? So
And the crazy
yes,
thing is, this isn't just a paranoid. I want to, online stalk this new guy. It's like, that was him,
that was
student with
absolutely him.
machete.
It was not hard to find. And like, honestly, like his story was like, it was college. There was like a bigger fight happening. Like I again, like, don't judge people for some of the decisions that you make in the past, right? What I found worrisome was that he couldn't articulate why that was so bad and what he's learned from it to be a better person in the future. And that's what I was needing to hear. So like,
He was like, well, as long as no one pisses me off again, it's not going to happen. It's like, that's not a satisfying answer.
it actually wasn't even far off. He was just like, well, I learned not to bring a machete to fights. And I was like, so you're not even learning not to fight. Like, you're just so,
I mean, I've had a knife wielding incident. We all
we both have. We've
our...
talked about this. We were both fearing for our lives, and it's like understandable. But like, what did I learn from that? Like, that's never the answer. Like, violence is never key. Like, what happened if like someone would have like, right? I've learned a lot from that. So
Yeah.
that's my amateur alert. If you're gonna tell me something on a date, be ready for me to look it up.
Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean scrub your internet presence, okay? Because we'll find it.
Just be honest. No, like, just be honest. Just be honest and upfront about who you are. And like, if you say that you've been arrested, I feel like you should say for a violent crime. I'm sorry. Like, anyways, okay.
Listen, Jackie's going to track your Instagram, your Enneagram, your great-great-gram, 23andMe, 23, and who is she? Okay? We're checking it all. Psycho just report, not just FICO.
So speaking about reports, I don't even know if that's a good lead-in. I forgot what topic we're talking about today.
We're reporting back from the field of the good Lord. Our expert today had a mission in life, and that was to be on God's mission as a missionary. And I realized I was going in there with a cheeky tone, and I'm definitely not mocking what their life choices are. And they're going to be the expert on telling us really the ins and outs of that. But this is someone I know who was formerly a missionary. And I feel like that's it almost feels like a sort of ancient term or something, where I'm like, you can be a modern day missionary. And
well, it depends on the religion, right? Like, I don't think that, well, maybe they all do.
I know, right? I'm like, well, there's certain ones that don't really recruit, Jews aren't necessarily. Pause for a well-endowed man who's fulfilled and satisfied driving by in his loud car.
What's really great is I raised my hand. Like,
I saw that.
I muted to cough, and then instead of unmuting, I raised my hand, and then you had a truck, and it was just, this is the most chaotic day of recording we've had in a long time.
But all that to sum up, they were a missionary, and they're not now, and they're actually, and they have their relationship to faith, I would say, has changed, but they still are, well, they can tell us about where their faith is at. I won't speak for anyone else, but there is also...
Let's start with what is a missionary, right? And I think that, like, to start off, I have some Christianity in my background as like a child, not like a ton, but like Presbyterian. And then, like, we talked about this before, I'm Wiccan. And so I don't have a ton of religious background, but like, I did see the Book of Mormon, and that had missionaries in it. So
yeah, that's the big one maybe that people think of to this day, is that dreaded knock on the door. Do you have a few moments to talk about our Lord and Savior?
But there's more than that, right? So there's a lot of missionaries that do go to third world countries and provide aid in the name of God to convert, right? Like, so I think the first part of being a missionary is to share the word of God.
Yeah.
And then I think in that nature, there's often like humanitarian efforts that are taken as well. A lot of the time, depending on like where they're going or what they're doing. So
Yes, because there is some interpretations of the, Judeo-Christian Bible that say, essentially sort of the same thing that we have with the law. Like, ignorance of the law is no excuse for breaking it.
Yeah.
Ignorance of Christ is no excuse for not believing. And so how, in our compassionate Christian hearts, can we reach those people who may not have heard the word of God, or, didn't have an opportunity to establish faith? Because you do have to, confirm your faith to, say, go to heaven. Or, I'm not going to fully get behind any of these things I'm saying. I'm quite amateur at this point, but did have my own stringent religious upbringing to draw on those experiences. But then you're right, you do. I think I associate with, like, those sort of Habitat for Humanity type trips where you're like, we're going to Mexico to build 20 houses, or,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And it's like, it's about your selfless work ethic to sort of give that act of charity, but also to use that as like a community building moment
Well, that's
to,
the God's work. You're spreading the God's word through God's work. And I think those two things are like, they hang out.
yeah, works, I think, is a
Like,
potent religious word I've heard used before, like works and wonders, or works and miracles. I don't know.
well, and I think that is like, if you're talking about miracles, for example, like having, when you live in dire straits, having people come in and help you, that is a miracle, right? Like, and if you're all of a sudden like, yes, this miracle came about because like I am on God's mission to be here and spread this word, like I do think that that's very convincing, like of the fact, right? Like if you're receiving what you might call a miracle, and then you're told that miracle is because of like a figure, I would probably buy into it, right? I'd be on board. I think
Yeah.
the only reason
Yeah.
I'm like spiritually the way that I have chosen to be is that I don't have faith. I really, really like struggle with it. I'm a very fact-based person. I'm a very science-based person. I only vibe with Wicca, not because I really believe in magic, but I love the planet, I love the world, I love the moon. I like feeling connected to them and paying homage to them, and that's kind of what my Wiccan practice is about. But I don't believe in things, and so I've actually always kind of been jealous of people's faith, because like when I've gone through times in my life and felt so alone, right? And to have believed that there was someone out there looking out for me, or that there was somebody with me in those moments, like an omnipresent God, like I do think that there's like a lot that provides. It gives you direction in life. I've always been very kind of jealous of the people's ability to believe in that way. Because I
Well,
can't.
yeah. And what you're saying too about the, sort of showing the, like, spirit of God through your actions, and that kind of like charitable, like, actuality, reality of it. I think that sort of is the one thing that draws me towards any sort of religion, or that I still kind of seek and crave in my life. Because as much as I've had an evolved, changing relationship to religion, I did a very strong backlash where then I was like, I had to really kind of watch myself to not instantly judge people when they told me that they were religious, and then to sort of like integrate and accept that. And now I'm sort of at this, swinging back a little more towards, I'm a spiritual person. And the thing I admire about a church and faith communities is that, like, communal sense of, like, that is the best thing about church, is helping your fellow
Yeah.
person, and like being there in those like human complicated moments when you can give of yourself to other people. And in fact, I did go with our guests to church because I have been, like, sort of craving that sacred space of church, that place where we go to sort of step outside of ourselves a little bit, whether it's an act of worship or an act of community or an act of charity, gratitude, all those things that I think are such important values. And like, where do I get that in my life? And is there, a fun LA church that's maybe lighter on the organized religious part, and, heavier on the collaborative community sense? And, I haven't quite found my faith space yet, but I seek to manifest it in my life.
I think that's all you need to do, right? Like, I love churches. I love pretty much any place of worship, because I think that like there's always like a lot of like some of humanity's best moments come from faith. And whether that be in like an organized religion or in a moment or in other people, I do think that like believing in things really like really hard, like, because I think like I don't believe in magic, but I do believe that like our thoughts and our like minds have impressions on the world, like a vibration or something, right? And that like that can change things. Like I really do think that like having a good mindset changes the way I interact with people, which makes my like interactions nicer, which means that I am a happier and enjoyable person, right? Like that came from believing that I should be happy, right? And I manifested that happiness in my life. So I think that there's like so many components to this. And I think what's really fascinating is, you know, you and I are discussing our lack of faith in one kind of organized thing, is that this is what people, you know, in this scenario are devoting their lives to sometimes. Like I know in the Mormon religion that it's part of it. Like I think that like it's almost a requirement that when they reach a certain age, they have to go out on the mission. They get assigned to all these different places. Whereas I think other people or other religions, I can't say how I know everyone works, but have like a group of people that are missionaries and they're the ones going out and like spreading it. And I think that there are other groups that are like, oh yeah, like we do it like the, you know, our church goes to Mexico once a year and we build like 3 houses, like, right, that's their form of missionary. So I do think it can come in so many different formats and like levels
Yeah.
of commitment from yourself.
Yeah, right. Like, is it just something you practice in your day-to-day life? Like, oh, I'm going to work it into this conversation, or, you know, reach out to a friend I know is struggling? Or is it, yeah, are you going to get something more structured where you're linking up with your church, you're linking up with the group to like say, like, put me on the front lines, like send me to, you know, a mission in another country. And I know I have friends who are Mormon that did a trip to Poland. He speaks Polish now. Like he, you know,
Mhm.
it's like you can
Right?
get really, you know, dedicated to a cause.
Well, you can get cultured from it, right? Like as
Yeah.
somebody who is always really like wanting to see the world, like had I like been religious, I totally would have taken an opportunity. Like, and I think that's the thing with like the Mormon religion, that they're like you get stationed like anywhere in the world. Like I think you could probably, I bet you could probably request places, but like you could be in a college town, like a lot of college towns have missionaries, or you could be in Poland, or you could be in, you know, Japan, you could be in
Yeah.
Africa. You know, you could
And
be down
this,
in like Ethiopia, like where
yeah.
can you be? Like anywhere, right? So yeah, I think it takes a different level of dedication. And then you think, I would assume that like nuns are a form of missionaries, right? Like in
Mm,
monks, maybe, like, because you're like on a lifelong mission. I don't know if
married
that's
to
like,
God.
yeah, like, I don't know if that's like a, like if they're like
I
the higher,
actually
like,
don't know what a nun does now that I'm thinking of it. I'm like, they just cloister, they just stay in their little towers and make breads and beers.
they do a lot of humanitarian work. So like sometimes that is making breads and beers, right? Like that's like sustainability. They do, you know, a lot of schools, a lot of teaching, a lot of
Oh yeah.
education. So my
That's right.
mom was raised Catholic and my mom went to Catholic girls' school, and my mom like remembers getting her hand hit with
Corporal
a ruler
punishment.
by the from the nuns. Yeah. Um I think we have a lot less nuns than we used to. Like I think that's also
Yeah.
like something different. Like it used to be like where you'd send unwed mothers, they would be orphanages, they would be like all kind of like a stopgap humanitarian social effort for communities, whereas now I have no idea. I mean, all I can think, oh god, this is so bad, I'm gonna sound so bad right now, but all I can think about is Sister Act, like with Whoopi Goldberg.
That was some real nun propaganda.
My brother loved that movie, so like
Real
I see a lot
nun
of,
recruit video.
but they were like cleaning up the community, they were like working with the children, they were doing after school projects. So that's kind of what I would assume, and that's why I'm kind of like, I wonder if being a nun is like, you know, like the top level of missionary, right? Like you were such a good missionary that they recruited you for the nuns. or
Well,
months.
yeah, I'm also just curious too about the like admin side of it. It's like, what is the church like? Who is the church reaching out to, or any of these ministries reaching out to? If you're going, say, to Mexico, do you reach out to a church there? Do you reach out? Do you have to
Yeah.
like get
They have
permits
sister church,
and
I think,
building
usually.
building
You're like,
permits and things like
I
that?
imagine they like have like a religion conference, right? And like all the like pastors get together and then they're like, "Oh, like we're opening, we need houses. Like there's a devastation in Peru. We're going to go down there and build houses. Let me see if there's, if I'm Episcopal, I'm going to see if there's like 6 Episcopal churches down there that I can reach out to." I bet they have like a network, like a website, like or something where it's like, Episcopal people, and then you like reach out to them,
Episcopal.
and then you reach out to them and you're like, "Hey, do you need any help?"
Yeah.
That's my best guess.
Yeah, well, we certainly are throwing a lot of guesses on the board. We've talked broadly about Mormons and Catholics, and I don't think this person was in either of those faiths. But I'm also interested in like where their journey has brought them to now, and sort of the transitioning out of being a missionary, but keeping a relationship to faith also through the lens of I know this person through the queer community, so kind of the integration of those things that can feel at
Yeah.
opposition and how you maintain your sense of faith with
And
the
self at the
issues
same.
that come up. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow. All right. Well, I'm excited to learn. I really hope the next topic that we record back that we like know this, because my brain is going to break soon, because I'm like I have no idea. I have no concept, but I'm so excited to learn. Like let's go mission.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. We're Experts Now is joined by our lovely guest this episode, Audrey. Audrey, welcome to the pod. Tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you so much. This is the first pod I've ever been on or in, but
Yes.
I I live in LA. I hail from Alaska, which is always shocking to people, but it's because there really aren't that many Alaskans in the world.
No.
It's a very tiny population, so your chance of meeting one is fairly rare. So you've met me. Hello. And yeah, I work in TV and film when we're not on strike, and that's about it.
I haven't met a ton of Alaskans, but Rebecca and I were in Seattle last year and
Oh,
we did
that's
meet
right.
one, and he kept telling me that he was like, "I'm just trying to meet a nice Christian girl." And then he'd be like, "I have all this money and I have a penthouse." And I like looked at him, I was like, "If you're trying to meet a nice Christian girl, you need to not lead with your money, my guy. Like that's not the."
But see, I like that the spirit in you. Jackie was like, "Well, I am going to confront you, and I am going to question all of your values and life choices, and really see what your business strategy is, and if this whatever 5 startups he was running remotely
Oh my
while
God, of course.
living in Alaska."
Yeah. I like to question people's reality, but that's fine. That's enough about me.
It's important.
I
It's
do
kind of the
think that.
theme.
Did
Yeah.
you come down for like getting into the TV and film industry, or were you just like done with the Alaska lifestyle?
I had a journey. So
Okay.
my family actually moved to Colorado when I was like 16. So I say I grew up in Alaska because I was born and raised there, and it is my identity. I have a tattoo about it. But then we moved to Colorado, and then this is where we jump into the story, because I was going to I actually didn't have any college plans. Like I just didn't. And my parents hadn't really helped shepherd that process. I knew I wanted to do film or storytelling. But then somehow I got roped into doing YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission, which is a nonprofit, non-denominational missionary organization in essence. And so I did that instead of college, and that took place in San Francisco, is where they were located. Their headquarters was. They're all over the world. They're global, and we can get into sort of what their mission statement is and how they came about even as early as the 60s. But I did that, and then by way of San Francisco, I hopped around. I moved back to Colorado, did a million odd jobs like Census Bureau agent, substitute teacher, pizza maker, and then
I have
went,
so many questions about Census Bureau agent, but we'll talk about
And
that
I've
on
got
another
questions
different
about
episode.
pizza maker.
let me give you all the expert advice on all of these jobs. And then I went to LA finally, which is, where I wanted to pursue storytelling, and it didn't work out. So then I moved to Portland, Oregon, where my sister lived, and I worked up on the Arctic Ocean in Alaska for a documentation and engineering company. Did that for a few years and moved back to LA. I mean, it's like not the most exciting. It's just a bunch of hopping around until finally I came here and stayed. So I've been in LA for about 10 years.
I like it though, because like I feel like you're like it's just a lot of hopping around. It's like, no, you did a bunch of different jobs in there, and I feel like
Oh, yeah.
I'm very much in that like lifestyle of like just being like a yes person. Like an opportunity presents
Mm.
itself, and I'm like, fuck yeah, that sounds cool. I'll do that. But you said the missionary place was non-denominational. So was
Mhm.
that like still like Christian, just non-denominational? Okay, so it was, I was like, I was wondering if there were like non-Christian missionaries, and all of a sudden I was like, my mind was blown.
For
Um,
sure.
I think that's
but
just Habitat for Humanity.
I think that's just the UN.
yeah, Peace Corps, I guess there
I,
are. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
no,
Peace
no,
Corps.
but I mean, I believe, I'm not one to necessarily debate what a categorically Christian or non-Christian person is, but I know Mormons, for example, have missions, and as a former evangelical, I would say we were very different than Mormons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's all different groups. And yeah, the Jesuits, right? The Jehovah Witnesses, like
Mhm.
there's a wide spectrum.
Yeah, all doing different things. Like I think we like mentioned this in part one. Like
Yeah.
I saw Book of Mormon, like
I was going to say, we did bring up Mormons a fair bit because that's the
Uh,
one I'm familiar with, my friends who have gone on missions. Like I had a friend who went to
yeah.
Poland and
Mhm.
And
very
that seems
Polish.
very much like a rite of passage, right? Like it's just sort of expected that you will complete a mission. I don't know. So any Mormon, please correct me, but that's my understanding of it,
Yeah.
is it's like pretty baked in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mission trip.
So this was a choice then for you. This was just something that you were inspired to do, not something that you were like, okay, this is part of kind of what we do generally in our family or whatever. It was something that you were inspired to do.
Yeah, I grew up in a Presbyterian home, but around 8 years old, my mom stopped fighting my sister and I from going. We would just be like, I hate it. We're not going. She's like, fine. And that's how we got out of church. We were still like a Christian family, if you will, but then something happened. So I have an older sister. She's 5 years older. Growing up, we were always at each other's throats. Communication was really tough between us. And then when she was about 16, no, she was about 18, she was dating this guy whose mother was a traveling minister. And my sister got like radically saved, like
Ah,
born again. And the change in her countenance and the way that she interacted with me and the way that we could actually finally have a relationship that wasn't abusive, I was like, oh my gosh. So that was sort of the gateway into my faith experience. It wasn't something that our family really participated in. I mean, they were supportive, obviously, of being Christian, but in fact, when I came back, and I'll get into that a little bit, but when I came back from the first 6-month program I did with this organization, I did that almost as like a gap year. I graduated my high school a semester early. I had all the credits. Instead of like finishing out the year, I went to San Francisco and then traveled with this group and went to Turkey and Greece and Italy, and that's where we did our missions.
wow. A Euro trip.
Right. Everybody. No. And then when I got back, I was supposed to go to film school, allegedly, even though we made no plans for that. And I was like, guys, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go be a missionary. And like my mom walked out of the room. She didn't talk to me for several days. Like they were pissed because,
Wow.
it was just so outside of the scope of what they had expected.
Okay,
That's a
yeah.
little
So it was a
surprising.
choice.
I feel like I would have made some assumptions about, like maybe it's just something your family is very into and supportive of versus like kind of a nuanced perspective for parents that aren't. So it's like, it's not like you're going to join the circus or like go follow a band,
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really involved in advocacy work, and like I've just always been involved in like communities and whatnot. When I was 18, 19, I had like watched this documentary on the invisible children in the Sudan, and it was like super inspiring. I actually told my family I wanted to like go like volunteer at the project, and my family didn't talk to me. They were like, if you do that, we will literally not talk to you. And it's funny because like most people wouldn't think families would have that response. But I think as parents, they see you going so far away that they can't protect you. And that like angers them in such a kind of weird way of like, yeah, you raised me to be independent thinking and an advocate and to help the world, and now you're mad when I want to do it. So I can relate, but I'm interested to hear about like this first journey. Like, so like, how did you hear about the group, and then how did you decide to go?
Yeah, so when we moved to Colorado, we started going to this church that was again non-denominational, and that's very typical. I think if you looked across the landscape of America, there's tons of like evangelical non-denominational churches, and that just means they don't ascribe to the doctrine of um, Presbyterians or, gosh, guys, all of the names have failed me,
I
like
know.
Lutherans
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
um, any of
Adventists?
those.
Yeah, I don't know. Like
Maybe that feels
Baptist,
like a
there's
Oh,
Baptist.
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 Okay, we're really
Yeah.
nailing it.
Anabaptist. And then there's Snake Church.
Snake Church. I mean, the spectrum is so wide, right? But I would say that that's probably the most prominent. And it's also a little bit, it can be insidious and misleading because I think something that church does so well in that camp, in a generation for me of like Young Life, which was the movement in high schools where you have these like cool youth leaders that are like, let's talk about God. And it's a way to make community. And usually the cool kids in your school are going to it. And you're like,
I remember Young Life. They play Flyleaf at the
yes.
church
I
gathering.
mean, in high school, we had this venue, this concert venue where we would get these rock groups to come through. And I would do a bit where I was like the MC and I would put on all these characters and everybody from the town would come out because it would be really great bands just like touring through the middle of nowhere, Colorado. And it was cool. And I think that's something that in terms of indoctrination, and I don't necessarily mean that in a negative context, but I think for a lot of young people who don't have a community to plug into, Christian culture, non denominational culture can feel very almost like punk
Yeah.
because you're breaking away from your family. You're doing the unexpected. You're saying F the man to like society's expectations of you to go to school. And you're like going to go make a difference. You're going to go across the world. You're going to see things nobody else is seeing your age. So there is a component of it that's very appealing and very, I think like independent and freeing for a young person. So I knew about the organization because different people at my church had spoken about it. But to be a great younger sister, my older sister went to it the year before I did. She went to the location in San Francisco and came back with the coolest stories. And I was just like, I wasn't fully committed to even knowing what school I wanted to go to. And, I think like the UK and Europe has great value in having gap years that are pretty expected. So for me, I almost treated it like a gap year. Like I'm just going to go do this thing. I'm going to go see the world. I'm going to find out more about myself. I'm going to serve people, love people, on and on.
I mean, it sounds cool. Like I very much would have been appealed to like the traveling and the getting out and seeing the world. I think my relationship with like religion was kind of like dashed because I had such a like traumatic childhood, and I think that like a lot of the time when you are not exposed to religion extensively, before that trauma, it's not where you find the answers for yourself, right? And so I remember like going to some church groups in high school, and I've like been to church on and off throughout the years. I think it's like fascinating. Don't really relate to faith. It's something I've always been very jealous of, that people can have that like solidarity with something out there. But I think I would have definitely, like what you were saying of like how it was the cool kids. It was definitely why I went to do things. It was often a guy that I had a crush on. And it was like straight edge guys would like be into church, right? Like I was punk rock. And so there was like a ton of like overlap. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned that because I don't think a lot of people do realize that like the emo scene in particular had a large overlap with like the Christian culture. So I do think you're right. Like it is very enticing. It is very cool kids are doing it, and now you're gonna go see the world and like spread love. Like there's nothing bad sounds about like that sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah, and also like it's a time in your life when having a purpose kind of feels rare and special, and there's a lot of like listlessness and like directionlessness, and to feel like you're actually connecting with the real world and doing something that has like a tangible kind of like change point. And then yeah, just there is like a certain sort of like, I don't know, attractiveness of being energized by a cause. And like that, I think can be very attractive to just like be on fire for the Lord, and your passion, like it kind of breeds a kind of passionate energy that's very appealing.
Well, that, and then the community that you build from it. Like some of my closest friends to this day are still from being a part of that organization or doing missions because you essentially go, I mean, this program in particular, it was called DTS, which is Discipleship Training School. And I think that's the huge emphasis for missionaries is like go and make disciples of
Okay,
others,
so there's an
you
actual
know,
training
just like the
school.
well, a training school for this program for youth with a mission, but it's like the idea from the Bible obviously being like, you know, if you are to love one another, then you are to share the good news with one another, and that means to like disciple others in the way of God and in the way of Jesus. Which you know, I'd love to unpack that later in this conversation, but at the time, like you know, you get together with this group of people. So the schools depend on the location. There's schools in Thailand, there's schools in Hawaii, Kona, there's schools all over the country. And as I mentioned, this one in particular was in San Francisco, downtown Tenderloin, which if anybody knows San
I
Francisco,
live in South
it's
San
like,
Francisco.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys know. And that's where we lived. Like as a 17-year-old, that's where I went and lived after being in a town with one high school and like no diversity, very little diversity. It was intoxicating to be in a city, to be a part of something, and to be in this group of people who you've never met one another, but you're similar ages. It's like 18 to, I think the oldest was like maybe 30. For these discipleship training schools, you have leaders who are kind of similar ages, peers. Some of them are like foreign. It's your first time, you know, like being friends with a British person, and you're just so excited. And you go through this entire time together, and a lot of it is also about, you know, your relationship with your faith and your relationship with God. So you're sharing your deepest and darkest, you're crying, you're like trauma bonding. It can be really intense and really intoxicating, and you feel like you have found the answer to life.
Is there
Yeah.
any hooking up happening? I guess not, right?
Um, I mean, I suppose there have been instances, and that becomes a big scandal. You know, it's very much a part of purity culture, which is like, you know, abstinence, no sex before marriage, courtship. I did get involved with a guy who was trouble, and we held hands. And that was a big deal. And then he got sent home for other reasons.
Wow, into the
But
bad boys.
I
Holding
just
hands.
love that whenever you were in the TL, I was probably wandering around, like doing like probably a decent amount of drug usage and like hanging
yes.
out with questionable people. I was probably the exact person you were trying to save. Like you guys were all looking for an example, and you were like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that one right there, that's the
That
one."
troubled youth. Yeah, she needs saving.
I did.
Oh my gosh.
So how many missions? Like, because you kind of like you've said this plurally. How many missions did you go on?
Well, so what you know, and there are dogs in this room. How many missions did I go on? I too many to count. No, it wasn't that. My role became when I came back on staff with the organization, I became a DTS leader, which means I then led the groups that I had done. So I was like 18 years old, leading groups of 15 people, you know, some of them close to 30. And I did 3 of those trips, but the location itself, they like to think of themselves as like, as you know, like your life is a mission. So everybody who lives in San Francisco, it's not just that it was a training base, it's also that we were doing outreach to the unhoused population, working with, they've developed an incredible program to work with victims of human sex
Yeah.
trafficking. Like there's a lot of really great outreaches and resources that come from that organization. And so they're more focused on like, let your lifestyle be a mission, you know, to others. So then there's locations, like I mentioned, based in other parts of the world where it's much more foreign. And if you go on staff there, it feels like the entire time you're just doing missions versus going out on these, you know, shorter 2 to 3 month excursions to places in the world. So I went my first year, as I mentioned, it was Turkey and Greece and Morocco, and Italy, and then the next year it was Morocco and I'm lying. It was Egypt and Italy, and then Morocco and Italy.
Why are you
Yeah,
going for the
I feel like
Italians
maybe
so
there was
much?
more.
Like, are they just like not okay?
Right?
Like,
It's all the wine. The signs
It's
have been
because
there.
of Rome
Um,
and the Vatican. They know what they've done.
mm,
I don't know what they've done.
yeah, actually. Okay, honestly though, if there was a group of Christians that were like on missions to expose pedophile rings, how amazing would that be? They're like,
About time, I guess.
we're not going to TM this. Take the idea, folks. This is our gift to you. We like, you know what? This is the idea. Take it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
exactly. No, so each base would have a commitment to sort of a different part of the world. And that was very strategic. You know, there's this whole ideology that I'm not even going to get into too much because I don't fully understand it, which is they would always talk about like the 1080 window. You know, everybody in faith has different eschatologies. Like how is the second coming of Christ going to
Mhm.
happen, or like how is the end of the world going to happen? So many people are losing their minds right now because of the situation in the Middle East, and you know, crazy individuals thinking that this is like the end, and so it's a good thing ultimately. Having said that, the goal was to make sure that you're reaching every person in the world. So there were groups that were going to the Amazon or, you know, remote areas in different countries. Our commitment was, for whatever reason, to Italy, and one of the reasons being that, yeah, they have faith, but it's more of a cultural identity. You know, I think very much in the city of Rome, the feeling, and don't let me speak for anybody, but what we understood to be the feeling was like God is dead. You know, because they had Catholicism and it was just the Vatican, and that was their cultural upbringing rather than what evangelicals focused on, which was like the personal, intimate relationship with God.
Yeah, it is. It's how widespread Christianity and you know we've just religion has been such a part of humanity for so long that at this point even the same religion is so different. Like just where you go in within one country, within our country, and then I can't even imagine like how it is deeply tied into people's experiences of their culture and language and lifestyle and kind of interesting how we address those points on salvation and like, well, really to get to heaven, you need to have this kind of like understanding and belief and relationship. And yeah, even just the issue of like, are we worshiping Jesus? Is God dead or is God alive in the church? You know, who it's so complicated and essential to the people's worldviews. So like making any kind of change is must be so difficult to I don't know how you do that compassionately.
So, when you're going to different locations, is there a different mission, or is like because you were saying like it's to like affect every person in the world, but like is there a different approach? Like we're trying to save these people in Thailand, where we're trying to influence these people in South Africa, for example. Like, or are you like it's the same thing? It's cut and paste in every place that you go.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that I necessarily know the answer. What I can say is that so much of the basis was about being spirit led. And what that means is that if the Holy Spirit lives in you, and is alive in you and gives you discernment, and everybody has the ability to talk to God and hear from God, then you might have structure. Like we know that, and a lot of the work started with the basics, the practicals. So like we would go to orphanages and help build orphanages or like do service work. So service is always an incredible way to just like provide help. But there is obviously, and there's way too much to get into, right? But the white savior complex where missionaries just go for like a few months and they make themselves feel really great because they did something. And every guy's profile picture on a dating app is him with like children in Africa. But so there is that problem. But I think service is an incredible way to connect with people and provide something that's tangible. So there would be that. But then the spirit-led portion of it is like, okay, God, like every day, depending on who your leader was, but when I would lead, it would be like, okay, we're going to pray and see what we feel like we should do today. And time again, the craziest part of it is that people independently would get the same answer. It would be like, oh yeah, we would go break up into different groups and everybody would come back and be like, Piazza Navona. It's like, what's happening in Piazza Navona? And then somebody would be like, I don't know, I just kept getting the name like Diane. And so then we'd meet a Diane and be like, hey, this is crazy, but like, can I pray for you? And she'd be like, yeah, and break down crying. I mean, that's like the fantasy version, but stuff like that would happen a lot. It was more about like, okay, God, how can you use me? What do you want to do? And go from there.
That's like mind boggling. Like just to like, oh man, if I was letting just the world guide me or like the spirits guide me, I was just like, I would be like, let's watch Jerry Springer.
Says the witch.
Smoke a joint and watch Jerry Springer today. That's what I'm supposed to be doing, right? And that's why I'm a witch, Rebecca.
Yeah.
The spirit led you to witchery. Well, now, so I guess in like a sort of after the mission is over, and like how have you sort of recontextualized your faith into, any changes that have happened in your life now?
Thank you. It is important to acknowledge that this was like 18 years ago. But I'm somebody who, when I came to faith because of my sister's radical conversion, for me, it wasn't in a church. It's not like I went to a church service and somebody like pushed me down and I was shaking, with the spirit. It wasn't anything like that. It was a genuine, like supernatural feeling I had from her praying for me, and something clicked and I was like, okay, this is different. This is real. And I started to cultivate my own relationship with God, with faith. And that's something that has always been a staple in my life and I've always held on to, but its expression has changed and varied, and not so much because of my relationship with God as much as trying to contextualize it within America, within Western Christianity, within being an individual who has come out as queer since my days as a missionary, and reconciling what that means inside of a church that isn't affirming, finding an affirming church that still relates to God, but, believes that all people were created in the image of God and are to be loved and celebrated rather than changed and altered and hated. So I think, for me, that faith expression has always been a part of my life. And I guess that, later life. And I suppose for me, the translation of missions is just about the purpose that I felt in the midst of that, which is to be loving, is to like change people's lives with love. And I think the subscription to evangelical Christianity really puts that in a narrow box. Like, to be loving means to convert people. It means to lead them into the Lord's prayer of salvation and to baptize them and to make sure that they're, living their best lives. Probably in a church that is misogynistic and homophobic and probably voted for Trump and probably talks about it from the altar. I don't think that's the most loving thing. So for me, it's more about what does that mean in my life? And it's something that I'm always like, stepping up to and kind of going away from, which is finding a sense of purpose. How do any of us find a sense of purpose? And for me, I do think I'm most aligned with it when I am rooted in my faith. And that, again, is such a specific word for so many people. But for me, that just means being connected to a force that I believe is loving and expressing that and sharing that in the most loving way to others, which often is subtle and not fueled with, religion per se, as much as just like, how can I help? How can you help? How can we help each
Well,
other?
I love what you're saying, because like so much of like what you're kind of saying or your virtues are like aligned with mine, right? And I come from a very different like
Yes.
religion and spiritual belief and like process, but I find that the spiritualities and the types of people that I vibe with are the people that do are coming at it with love. And I think that is, I don't know if I talked about this in part one, but like I think that is what really like is hard for me with some of these religions who do see love in such a narrow way, right? Like I remember as poli-sci major in college reading a paper about why people were pro-life and like the belief behind it. And it was talking about evangelicals and how like the belief is that you need to save people, and that is what love is, and that is what goodness is. And that when people feel that others are having abortions, it's almost in a personal like assault to their own like giving of love. And I had never kind of like heard it portrayed in that sense. And it like really like kind of like flipped my thinking on it all, because I was like, yeah, like if you are seeing the world through that lens, I do understand why you think pro-life is the answer. I do understand why you think that you have to convert people and that like missions and different things are so important, because that's the way that you're told that is the only way that you can provide love. And I think it's hard because so many religions do have something in common. And like we all do want goodness in the world. It's just we're defining goodness in different ways. And that's the hard piece. But I do think I do like that we have so much in common in that. Like, I think there's a lot of goodness in like most religions out there and the way that we practice it. And if you're coming at things with love, you can't really go wrong. I don't
I think where people get lost is that, you know, so many people go to church and are taking in what's being said from the altar. And who is the individual speaking to them? It's usually some angry guy who's probably grooming, somebody in his congregation.
know. Yeah.
Statistically, I'm so sorry, pastors. um, I don't hate pastors, but the abuse of power.
For sure.
Anyways,
And it's the same thing. There's a lot of
but
narcissists in politics, right? There's also a lot of narcissists
yes,
and like any type of leadership that you see out there. You get people who are doing it for good, and you are getting
yeah,
people who are doing it because they just want the power.
yeah.
It's same for religious leaders.
It's that, and then I think the element that is missed, which I'm so grateful that my connection to faith didn't come from a church, because it means it's never like
Hmm.
faltered by church, which is that I think if people actually got to know who I consider to be God, if I've already got to know my God, no, but I do think like the universe or whatever it is to most people, like for you and me, for you and I, it's probably the same source, like, but the source of love. When I would pray and when I would talk to God, that's when I felt most confident about coming out in my queer identity, when I felt most confident about not having to like ram the Lord's Prayer down a stranger's throat. And I think that that's the difference, is people are being led by a man on a stage from a book that they themselves haven't read. And it's like, if you actually tap into your own connection with that presence, I think you start to slowly change in a way that is much more like the person of Jesus and a lot more loving, towards, everyone you meet. I mean, the first two commandments, the greatest commandments, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as you love
I mean,
yourself.
Jesus sound pretty dope. Like, if I'm gonna be real, like the guy sounded like a
Right?
pretty good time, and I would have hung out. And I think that was something that I
Yeah.
really struggled with. Like, I remember when I was in middle school is when I kind of like was like really when I became anti-religion, not necessarily like against God, but anti-religion, because I was being told like, well, don't be friends with people who have sex or do these things. They're bad. And I had sexual trauma at a very, very young age. And I remember just thinking to myself, does that make me bad? Right. And like, does that mean that I should shame other people that like
Yeah.
have that same experience? And it was very confusing to me. And I think for me, as usual, I like to run away from things. So I was like, bye. Like, but that was like really what turned me off, was being told. And I remember thinking, like, wasn't Jesus friends with Mary Magdalene? And she was like a whore. So like, why are we being told that we can't be friends with people who, make mistakes or owning their body in a way that they're comfortable with?
Do you
Yeah.
Do you feel
Yeah,
like you
exactly.
ever have any, I mean, I guess, saying that you kind of started outside of the church, but do you ever feel like you have holdovers from purity culture, like need like baked in reactions to, I don't know, kind of keep yourself holy or pure in certain ways?
No, I'm super grateful because I think my personality is just one that was really protected by sort of those guidelines. Like I would consider myself demisexual, which is a term I feel like thrust upon me by this new age of younger people, and I'm still trying to understand it. But essentially, it means like
Yeah.
you take things
Mm-hmm.
slow. And I think in many ways, purity culture kind of protected me from making some choices that otherwise, might not have really been in my best interest. But I will say that it delayed, and speaking to a lot of like queer Christians who came out later in life, it did delay me knowing the truth about my own sexuality because I had this cover of, well, you're not supposed to be, like the most loving thing is to not be interacting with people like that if they're not like your person. But what that really meant is like I don't have to confront my disinterest in men for years and years and years because it's like it's covered under a
Oh,
different
snap.
title.
Like you just broke my brain.
Oh yeah.
Like damn, like that's so
Mm-hmm.
true. Like you wouldn't like you can cover up
Yeah.
other emotions by calling it something else. Okay, wow. That's gonna take some processing later.
Well, and I don't even know that it's that so much, but I think that for many people who might have been, queer from whatever, I don't know what I'm saying, but I think for a lot of people who have come out later in life and were involved in the church, that was very much something that kind of stagnated their personal process
Hmm.
because they didn't confront it. It was like, yeah, I'm not interested in guys because it's not the one.
Yeah.
Like when I meet the one, God's like, the best person for my life, then I'm going to be so into this. And the whole time it's like, no, you're just gay, dude. And I think we see a lot of Christian marriages where it's like, they get married really young because they want to have sex, but they don't
Yeah.
want to have sex out of wedlock and all this stuff. And then it's like,
This is even the
that was a
sex I
huge
like.
mistake.
Yeah,
Or
you
it's
don't
like,
find out until after you made the purchase.
yes.
Damn.
Or like, abusive relationships that are swept under the rug and protected by the veil of secrecy and just a lack of talking about anything that could be
A lot of
controversial.
shame. And I think that like for me is what I
Yeah.
often been turned off by a lot of organized religions is like the shame-based culture. I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
stuff in society right now that we're overstimulated and we are constantly told that we're not good enough. We don't need another area of our lives outside of social media to just tell us our self-worth is too high. So I think I don't know. You
Yeah.
were kind of saying something a minute ago of like, yeah, you didn't make choices that maybe weren't bad. Like, yeah, I was way too promiscuous. I gave way too much away. Like, I look back on it now after doing a lot of healing in my life and really working on myself and like realizing like, wow, like because of my trauma, I agreed to a lot of things that I don't think I actually wanted to agree to. Like, I'm not gonna like assign like sexual assault or
Yeah.
anything like to that, but I don't think I felt agency over my own body. And it took me a really, really long time to learn that as an adult. And I think, like what you were saying, you're like, that's kind of like a nice little built in there, right? Like, because of religion, like, even if you've had trauma, you're going to be more likely to protect your body, which is kind of a nice thing for young people to learn nowadays. I think we are exposed to a
Yeah.
lot with social media.
I do wonder what the modern Christianity looks like, because you have to wonder with this new Gen Z generation and Gen Alpha, and like we're hearing that they are, we're seeing trends that they're less sexually overt than like our raunch feminist ancestors of the millennials.
Feminist ancestors, I fucking
Yeah,
love
like
it.
third and fourth wave feminism about, wet ass pussy, body ownership, and that Gen Z is like, well, yeah, maybe it's like helpful to preserve some of your, romantic gestures and that
And your
energy.
body, like
Yeah.
agency over your body. I think that like things like the thong song did not like make our generation feel like we had agency over our bodies,
Yeah,
right?
it's just internalized misogyny. Even it can play out like that too. Like it just is toxic masculinity from the inside.
the last 30 years have been great, you
Yeah.
guys. I think. So where do you like find yourself like now looking back on it? Do you like kind of like, I look back on like my 20s as like, yeah, that was a crazy time, but like I'm really glad that I had it? Or like, you know, what is it in retrospect for you?
What a great question. I look back at it with mostly glad tidings. Again, I think some of the most important relationships in my life came out of that season. And, you know, when I came back from doing my DTS, my 6-month training, and I walked with my college class, I remember being like, I've seen the world. Like, I've gone around and done all these things, and everything here is exactly the same, except like 3 girls are pregnant. And that's, you know, I wouldn't have called those ones. Like, it was interesting to have that perspective, you know, and I didn't go to university, but I did a lot of life stuff, and like led these groups and learned a ton of skills, like how to negotiate in Morocco over prices when you're a woman by yourself.
Yeah, that's like important.
So I mean, you know, a lot of it too is that my frontal lobe wasn't hardened, so I thought I was invincible, and I did a lot of things. In retrospect, I'm like, that probably wasn't safe.
Same.
You shouldn't have done that. But yeah, I mean, just in a, you know, in a totally different light. So I don't regret it. The thing that I'm most frustrated with is, and I'll demonstrate it through the story that I always think of, which is, I remember once in San Francisco, you know, my thoughts on gay marriage and my thoughts on queer people was never one of hate or judgment. It was just more like, oh, I don't know that that's God's best. Like, that was sort of the message I came away with, is like, you know, love everybody, and like, I'm so happy you're happy, but like, I feel like maybe God has something better for you, you know, that like if you healed or if you whatever, you could tap into. And that was sort of the perspective I came at it from. And I remember one day being at the cable car turnaround on Powell Street. There was this guy in a Leatherman jacket with a giant sign and a megaphone, and he was like evangelizing. And this is where we get into like the different categorizations within even one faith. And his jacket said like, God hates whores, homos, like AIDS, like everything, just on and on and on, like unwed mothers, you know. And I tried to confront him, and I had so much rage in the moment, and I was just like, sir, like, what do you feel about God's love? And like, what do you feel about it's his, you know, kindness that leads us to repentance? Bible verses that like cite, you know, his approachability and his warmth, and he just wouldn't engage. And I think that that's sort of when I look back at it, that's the thing that hurts the most, and something that I want to figure out how to be more proactive with in my present is, you know, I think if I had been in the same environment, but one that was affirming of gay people, of different people, of trans people, of, you know, anybody who seemed other, I think it would have been the time of my life. But I do feel, because I was in that culture where even one of my closest friends once like prayed the gay away for me when I was like, I'm having these feelings. It's like, I feel like I have some relational regression, like the things that I should have been doing in my 20s to develop relationships and like go through those first heartbreaks, I didn't do until I was 30. And I feel like, where would I be now if I had had the space and the permission and the acceptance to be true to who I was during that time as well? Because the other stuff I want to keep. The other stuff is in like, love God and do good things, you know.
I hear that. Like, I like think of like the last few years of like working through my trauma, right? And I'm like, would I be married right now if I like had just put the trauma work on pause and had just focused on like relationships, right? Like, I think that we'll always have those questions about where we come from, where we spent our time, and if it was the wisest. And I think it's right. Like, I wouldn't change anything from my 20s, but like, man, I did not have mental stability. That I did not have, right? And like, where would I be? Like, I have made it really far in my career, right? But I did that in the last 6 years. I didn't do that in my 20s. So like, would I have been farther? I don't know. I think it's really easy to look back and say like what you missed out of. but like not wanting to give up on the good either, because the good is good still.
Yeah. I think as long as you're like a student of life, right? As long as you're willing to always learn from something, um, no time is lost or wasted.
I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's a very, very wise piece that many people should take with them. It's hard to not look at moments in our lives and like, I think I mentioned this before the call started. I had like a really rough week. There was like a moment there where I'm like, man, like 80 different things led up to that. What would I have done if I changed one thing? But like, I can't live that way, right? Like, that's just living in the past. You have to look forward and like how you can incorporate like the good things that have happened in your life and the lessons from the bad things. And
who knew there were so many transferable skills from being a missionary? Life skills. I mean, I'm just impressed with like haggling in Morocco that's a good confidence to have.
As like an 18-year-old girl who's just like, we're like trying to get, we accidentally went to the city of Fez when it was like its 1200th birthday or
That's
something.
old.
And there were always instances of like some men being inappropriate with the girls. And because I was the leader, even if they were older, I would go into like massive defense mode. But having to go to the train station and almost getting trampled because the entire town was there trying to get tickets out. And I'm like, we had a rule that we never went anywhere alone, but I do have some issues where I get a little entitlement. And I was like, it's fine. I'm the leader. I can do it. And being like, in retrospect,
well, I think what's just crazy is that you were 18 and the leader. Like, who was like, that is a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Don't.
Thank you. That's actually one thing I did want to highlight was just that YWAM Youth with a Mission was born out of a vision by this man whose name I'm going to butcher if I try to remember it. Basically, to empower young people to be missionaries, because prior to that, it had been like, you know, go to seminary, which is probably wise, go through all these things, get sponsored. You're like an older couple who's in Sudan, versus like you can be 18 and go make a difference, you know. And that was a beautiful part. And that was the punk rock part. And that was the like,
yeah, but like,
yeah.
maybe
So
still have somebody with some experience under the belt join them along on
chaperone.
their youth. Yeah, like I think that's the thing that's changed so much dramatically with like religion to like society in the United States is that in a lot of religion, you're an adult pretty young, like 18 or younger a lot of the times, right? And in society, man, kids aren't moving out till they're 25 now. Like it doesn't match up to like, why is someone getting married at 18 when you don't expect them to know what their job is, right? Like that to me is like bonkers. Like you shouldn't be having kids like that young. Like you just shouldn't. Like the fact that people have kids at 18, I am like, man, I was such chaos at that age. Like I could not have taken care of another human. Absolutely not. So, okay.
Well, what do you think, Jackie? Are we ready to go on our mission?
I mean, I don't know what mission we're going on. I got notes.
Well, you find your come to Jesus moment.
Literally.
Well,
I think you find inspiration. Like, you know, that's one of us always starts with this, like, right? I really thought what was interesting about this story was that it was not church itself, right? That it was a family member. And I've heard that before. So like you get your involvement, you get your encouragement, you find something inspiring, you come to Jesus, and then you want to share Jesus. I think like that's the natural progression, right?
And like all those things we were talking about of like the inspiration of having a cause and a calling and some way to really practice your charity and your discipleship and that last missing piece of like once you've really found the purpose of your faith for yourself, you need to sort of actualize it. And if you really have loving compassion, then that's going to drive you to bring that to the world. That's part of it. That's part of sort of the bargain of Christian faith.
I think it depends on them, right? Because I don't see a ton of Presbyterians going out on missions, like, right? I don't see the Methodists doing this, right? I think it depends on the sect and what they subscribe to. And if part of what your belief system is that to be loving and to be good is to share the message, not just to have it in yourself, but to share the message, then you're a little bit more obliged to go out there and do it, right? Because you want to be like the best version of yourself. Like if you're committing yourself to a religion, then you want to do it to like, you know, the T. That's why we are seeing wars happen right now over religion and the historical spaces, right? Like it's very important. And so then if you are engaged with an organization, they likely have some spots that they do it in or sister organizations, and you go out there and you spread the word. Sometimes through service work, sometimes through engagement,
sometimes just living by example.
That, and you'll want to have your personal, intimate relationship with God and be able to, I think, intellectualize that so you can share it with other people.
Yeah, you got to know your scripture.
And if you're going to have white savior complex, please take a photo with the children in Africa that you are saving.
Put it on your dating profile. It's better than holding a fish.
Absolutely.
Is it? I don't know.
It's that's the 3 types of dudes on dating profiles: with a fish, with the children, or Africa, or they're sitting with a tiger in like Indonesia. Those are the 3.
I was gonna say guitar, but that's not as bad, I think.
No, I'm here for the guitar. Like, and then I think, you know, you nurture that supernatural feeling, and you teach prayer, and you teach the mission, and then I think you continue to live that life is ideally what they do. And then but I think for other people, there's also the reevaluation of the lessons that you have learned out in the world, right? At the same time of being a mission, you are also exposing yourself to cultures that you would have never experienced otherwise, right? So I think then you have to like reconcile this. I'm out in the world and I've learned so many things because of being a missionary, but does that still align with why I became a missionary? And making those personal decisions for yourself on how you want to continue your relationship with God.
Amen, sister.
Said the Wiccan. I feel like I heard my autobiography. You summarized that so well.
Honestly, this is like a fascinating story. Like, I would love to spend like 9 hours like hearing like every stuff. You're like, and then I like something like you were like, I went up to Alaska doing like something that sounded very cool.
Works near my dad, actually, which is funny.
That's wild, but
it has some overlap in the career field.
Oh, actually, your dad. I'm like, yeah, my dad worked up there. So I didn't know your dad worked up there.
In Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse.
I worked in Prudhoe Bay.
Jesus.
I think we went over this once and we discovered that that you were there.
Totally different timeline.
Slightly different timeline, but not by much. And that's what's shocking.
But in the multiverse, you might have been there at the same time. So it's possible.
He was probably there. Was he after? It doesn't matter. Him and my father may have.
It was like 2008.
Yeah. Yeah, I was there from like 2000 and honestly, it might have, I don't remember my own life at this moment in time.
You need an autobiography.
I think I was working up there.
Gosh,
this is wild.
Maybe. It's 2010. 2010, doesn't matter.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. This was fascinating.
Oh my God.
Is there any
Such a pleasure.
Yeah. Is there anywhere we can find you if we want to on like social media? No? Okay. I love that.
You.
I love that.
I don't exist.
You know what?
I know.
I love that.
I mean, I do think I'm just too paranoid. I'm like, growing up in Alaska, the number of serial killers per capita puts you on edge.
It's high. It's a high amount. It's like there in Washington, something with the Pacific Northwest.
Pacific Northwest.
Something going on.
I know. So I'm always like, public profile? Do I want to get stalked and murdered?
The funny thing is I look up every guy that I go on a date with. I do like a little background check. Yeah. And so you're like, do I want to get stalked? And I'm like, I'm the stalker.
But you're not a threat. You're not trying to, like,
I'm trying to
do bad
I'm
things.
trying to threat assess is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
I'm out here for the mission. That's what I'm out here for.
Honestly, that would be such a service to women if that was just your job. They're like, hey, going on this date, here's the info. And you're like, $20. Here's everything you need to know.
For free.
I call mine the hot girl helpline. I say, I post the profile to
Ooh.
the girly group chat and like, have we heard of him? What's his deal? And they're like, this, and that. It's the hot girl helpline.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've heard of others sharing like an Excel spreadsheet, like
Oh my
very widely for their cities.
I need
Which
to
is
get
great,
on that
because then some
list.
people are like, I know. They're like, Jeff, he was such a nice guy. And somebody's like, Jeff did some very bad things to my friend. Like, avoid him at all costs.
I
It's that kind of tip.
love this
I-
coming in hot right at the end.
Women,
Yeah.
if you have one of these,
Women.
just send it to me. I love an Excel first off. And I love analytics. I will send you a pie chart. I will do some deep dives. Ladies, if you have this Excel, send it to me.
Oh my God.
Great
That
plug,
is the
right?
plug.
Yeah, great plug right there at the end. Well,
Women for women.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure, and it was lovely to meet you. All
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you so much.
right, let's go on a mission.
let's go on a mission.
That was great. And that was the show. Thank you everyone for watching, and we hope you stay curious.
If you enjoyed this video, watch our other videos here on YouTube, or you should listen to the episode on We're Experts Now podcast. Bex, where can they find us?
You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeart Music.
And what if they want to talk to us?
If you have ideas for something you want us to investigate, send us an email at we'reexpertspod@gmail.com. That's wereexpertspod@gmail.com.
Great job on that spelling.
Ooh.
A+. Do you do this professionally?
I believe we're both doing it professionally right now.
Wow. People should know about this.
I completely agree. And you can find us on Instagram at We're Experts Now Pod.
Thanks again. And if you enjoy the show, subscribe and comment, and do not forget to leave a 5-star tip.
That's a great idea. Are you a podcast expert?
I think we both are. I think
We're experts now.
This has been a Just Being Better media production.